Just going to call the meeting to order. Just a quick thing here at the beginning. I know oftentimes we don't get to acknowledge certain people, but I wanted to just comment on Joy Russ had passed over the weekend. And, she was a very big personality and a wonderful person, and we'll miss her. And it just reminded me to sort of acknowledge all the people who have passed, over the last year or so. We don't really do that outside of our memorial table. So it's just a sad moment, and I just wanted to acknowledge that and ask for just a moment of silence from everybody, if they would do that. Thank you. With that, why don't we get started? Guess we'll start with the meeting minutes from the January meeting. And everybody got a chance to see that, right? Everybody see those?
Yes.
Okay. We'll make a motion to approve it.
I make a motion that we approve the minutes from the January meeting.
Sorry. All those in favor?
Aye.
All right, great. With that, we've talked about sort of the way of having questions asked and answered. We'll come back to that later on. We'll have a discussion about that towards the end of the meeting. I know we have some written questions, which we'll address the written questions, but maybe towards the end of the meeting we can talk about what the process for that is going to be. So I'll leave that to you, and Rita, I'll leave it to you to start with financials.
All right. Okay, so 2021 has now been closed out. The net operating income was $330,405 after adding back depreciation. We're going to get ready for the audit to start later this week, or it could be pushed to the beginning of next week. The auditors had 2 immediate deaths in his family last week and has 2 funeral services this week. I did engage with a CPA to complete our corporate tax return. The fee for that return is $750. And I know we're going to answer questions at the end, but there's a question that came up pertaining to the tax return and the net profit for 2021. I was asked about paying taxes on that, but we have right out of $1 million we're carrying forward for a loss. So just to answer that question, there will be no tax obligation for that. Moving on to 2022. Of course, the board has all the departments by month in the back of their packet. For the total company, you'll have the January actuals versus the January budget, as well as the budget for the remaining of the year and the variance between the January actual and the January budget. I'll start forecasting after the first quarter. Page 1, you'll see that our net income budgeted for January was $45,259, and the actual at closing was $67,556. That shows our net income is better than budget by $23,032. That is due to extra cash generated, mainly in the PCC and a savings in a few other departments. But overall, in expenses, some related to the dining room, we did have an over budget in the expense area. Speaking of PCC, we now have 13 residents, which has increased from our budget. In January, our increase in PCC for our income was $19,000, but it also increased our meal cost slightly. We have the 7th suite finished, which as of today is sold. We have the ability to do some shifting around to build one more suite out, which we're in the process to do that. Kind of break down the budget for January and the actuals by department. In admin, we were $26,000 better than budget. Housekeeping was right at $4,000 better than budget. Maintenance was $7,000 better than budget. PCC's net income was almost $14,000 better than budget. activities and transportation was $7,700 better than budget. However, dining, we were over budget by almost $36,000. We did not have any unplanned or extraordinary items in January that wasn't already in the maintenance budget. Knock on wood somewhere. We increased our capital account, of course, by the $15,000, which brought us to $1,041,448. I did speak with the financial advisor of LPL. Never met the person, the first time I've ever had contact with him. We're not earning barely any interest at all. So he did send some paperwork over to kind of start relooking at that, whether it's with LPL or someone else. But we've got to submit something by March, whether we want to continue on in the path that we've been on or try to change some things.
Send that to Bill.
Okay. We had a decrease in our operating account by $117,000. As in January, we always pay a year worth of workman's comp, our last payment of our property insurance. We had 2 legal bills that came in that we got the bills late for. We had the remainder balance on the nurse call system for PCC, and our new health insurance carrier that we have now billed us 3 months at one time. I do expect that we'll get a $10,000 refund from the workman's comp in 2021 after our workman's comp audit in March. At the end of January, our total cash was $1,068,697. Moving on to the meal counts, as you can see, they're kind of holding around the same monthly mark, between 57 and 6,000 meals per month. We were closed for 2 days in the dining room during January for inclement weather. As of last week, all meal periods are open with no reservations needed. And as of today, all meal periods are open for dine-in, to-go, and delivery. There's no questions on that. I'll move on to the building. We've got a few projects in process, some that we finished. The laundry rooms were damaged several months ago from a leak from a rooftop unit, and the baseboards have finally been replaced in all 10 laundry rooms, and the painting has begun and is in process for those 10 laundry rooms. The nurse call system in PCC since our last meeting is complete. And the best news is once that was complete, it's now on its own system. Prior to that, the nurse call for the condos and PCC was all together. So after removing that, we were able to find that it was just a wire causing the nurse call, which we're actually calling it the emergency call system now, causing that not to work. So it is now functioning properly by sound and light at the front desk and in PCC.
That's great news. That will save us about $100,000.
134 to be exact.
How much?
134,000.
Thank you.
We count pennies.
The only other big project that we've got right now outside of the capital planning stuff that we've been working on is we do have a pipe in the boiler room that has a pinhole in it, but that is a fire systems area to work on. So they are coming out to tell us what they need to do to fix that. It may cause some shutting down of the water and so forth. For the other big projects, on the capital items, we've had 3 contractors submit 3 different bids. We've had meetings with them. 2 of them were very similar. The third one gave 2 different bids, one similar and one different. So we went back and asked the other 2 contractors to submit the exact same bid for the same work, so we should have that by the end of this week. And we can then set up a meeting with the contractors again to decide on which route that we should take. So we can schedule the annual or the special meeting.
Okay. So they're all three of them are gonna come back? All three of them will come back?
For presentation.
Yeah, for presentations where we can compare and contrast the bids.
Right.
But we'll all have the pricing.
Right, we'll have 2 bids from each contractor for 2 separate scopes of work.
I guess I'll ask you, Scott, I know you're going out.
Speak up.
Sorry.
Excuse me,
Scott.
please. Excuse me. One, would you speak into the microphone? That would be able to hear better. I appreciate that. Excuse me for interrupting. The second, while I'm standing up, when you do these spreadsheets, you highlight your spreadsheet nicely. It looks beautiful on the computer. It comes out black over here. You can't read these numbers very well. So if you just don't do that, we probably can ascertain exactly where you're talking. And those are just 2 minor things right now, but in particular, to speak to the gentleman in the front right there, please speak to the microphone, please. Thank you.
All right. So the question, so, and you're going out for a bit, right? So you will or will not be around for those presentations? Probably not.
What time?
I don't know, we're gonna get.
He's
we're gonna
coming
get-
back earlier than what I thought, so,
Oh, March 6th, okay,
yeah,
that's right, you said
so
that.
we could schedule actually something before the next board meeting.
Okay, that'd be great.
Mhm.
There's been a little bit of interest in whether or not there were some folks that were, I guess qualified would be the best way to say it, to maybe sit in on those meetings. Does anybody have any objection to having a couple of people, owners who might be interested in participating in the final presentation?
I think it's essential,
Okay.
and so we bring in people who are interested and knowledgeable, yeah.
Yeah, okay. So I'll make a motion to, sort of put out a note to see if there are people who are knowledgeable, skilled in the area, that could assist us in an advisory capacity during the presentations. We'll do that.
Okay.
Second?
Second.
Okay. Everybody in favor? Okay, good. All right, we'll do that. Great.
Alrighty, the next thing that you'll see, this is kind of a last minute thing, so it's in only the board packet, but I don't know if anybody's noticed that since the end of last week, right out front in the right of way, all the way across the property to our sign, trees now have been tagged with ribbon around them. So I reached out to the eminent domain attorney because we haven't heard anything from anybody about taking any of the trees out front. The last time we did meet with the city and the attorney was present, they stated that they did not need to take any property or improvements that MVT or the owners owned here. However, he did note that it is in the survey that line of trees is in their right of way. So the email was also copied to everybody at the city of Sandy Springs, so we're waiting to hear back from them.
Had you heard that?
Have you heard that? Okay. Would it be helpful if, because you've been in touch with the city?
I'll look into it.
Yeah, all right. So Rita, would you certainly give him the contact of who you talked to, and then
Yep.
you talk to your contacts?
Yep. Yeah, particularly the land manager for Sandy Springs is who we're waiting to hear back from today. So. All right, sales and leasing. We currently have 29 vacant units. That sounds like a lot, but we have 5 units that are for sale, 3 units that are for lease. 2 of them just now became available for lease. 13 units that are just people's paying on them every month. They're either a couple of them in probate or they don't know what they want to do with it. They're not ready to talk to anybody yet. 6 units are under contract. and 2 units are under renovations that will be for lease when they're finished. So, all that being said, we really only have 8 units that can be shown.
Why don't I just take a moment and talk about sales and leasing for a sec, just a sec, because there's been a lot of conversation about what we were doing with sales and leasing, and the board met. We interviewed several prospective sales and leasing companies. What we have ultimately decided to do on what will be a sort of a temporary basis or a trial basis or a probationary basis is we wanted to make sure that Jerry Bauer had an opportunity to understand what the board's expectations were from sales and leasing that had never really been done. So we've offered a set of guidelines for Jerry for the next 90 days to sort of work with us to make sure that we're meeting the needs that the board has, that the community has, and we're going to let that play out for the next 90 days. So I just want to make sure everybody knew that, and we'll move on, without any controversy about exactly what we're doing. We'll reevaluate it in the next couple of months, and we'll make a final decision. I think by May 31st. You guys okay with that? I mean, we all decided, so. Yeah.
While you're on that,
Congratulations, Jerry.
I do want to mention that we now have the PCC brochure, which looks fantastic. Turned out much better than I thought it would be, so very exciting. Shiny.
Yeah, no, that's actually, we should probably put a couple back there, but they'll be available up in the PCC. But Brad Bell and the sales and marketing team from last year put together a nice, beautiful brochure on the PCC. And
these
it
are
looks
actual
absolutely
pictures.
fantastic. So it's a good handout for folks, good way to market it to residents and anybody who comes in, family members.
Yeah, looks great.
Good, very informative as well.
All right, moving on to the committees. General announcement, I think.
All right, that's me again, right? The bearer of all the news. So the other day I sent out a note to the committee members who had served on committees for the last year. Some have served on for a long time. And with so much that we have to get accomplished here with the capital planning and budgeting, what we wanted to make sure that we were able to do is focus on just some basic committees as a committee, as a board, so that we were really focused, and then allow for those committees to serve out what I would consider to be projects. Projects which would help us define and shape what we were doing, as opposed to having all these committees that tended to get a bit sprawling, a bit less focused than we would want to have had, and we really have important needs to get to. So essentially, the note that I sent out to the committee members was explaining what it was we were trying to do there, and then reminding everybody of what committees were going to stay intact. Architecture, budget, audit, and nominating. Those are the committees that are approved by the board. And we are then going to sort of branch out from those things to do things like we may have decor, we may have landscaping, things being done, and we're going to leave that up to the individual committee chairs to determine how they will facilitate their business. But really what is going to happen here is those projects will come back through the board as they should, and be driven by the board, the chairs of those individual committees. I also need to remind everybody that we have 2 owner-led committees as well, one, from the annual meeting, one of which was the Morrison's focus, I'll just call it a focus group, if that's a good word for it, to make sure we understood more about the engagement that we have with Morrison and what the right path forward is. And there is also I think to be sort of really started, which is a committee around the communication and security of communication. So we've got that. We have not launched that. We're waiting for a meeting between, I think, Jill Odom and Rita, and then we'll assign it to one of the chairs when it's appropriate. So that's what is going on with the committees.
Okay.
Okay.
Does anybody have anything on
Yeah,
architect audit?
So I guess if we just sort of work around the committees as we know it, if anything's going on that we should know about.
You got anything for architect?
Oh.
Yeah, architecture would be first.
The architecture committee has not met since the first of the year, basically, so nothing is in progress there. Of course, we have the big expense, which we mentioned before, about the chases, and that's kind of putting a lot of stuff on hold until the funds on that are all determined, because that takes priority at this point in time.
Yes. Audit, I'll leave that to you.
Rita brought us up to date on the audit committee and when the audit will actually commence.
So budget, can we, budget, I think what we want to do is gather the capital, the next thing that we really need to do is the capital budget, right? Which we have not done yet. We have what we think is a good sense of about where we're coming in. We need to finalize that. In the meantime, what I hope we can do is start to pull together that budget for the March board meeting. And that way we can talk about it in the March board meeting. And if we can do that, then we should then proceed, if we have enough information, proceed knowing sort of the selection criteria that we were using for the work, the cost of the work, how it's going to be resourced and funded, and then go ahead and schedule some sort of meeting for April, I think would be the sort of the horizon that I would land on right now.
The special meeting in April?
Yeah, I would tend to want to, when do we have to do notification for the special meeting?
21 days prior.
21 days. So, do we want to do it in conjunction with the board meeting, just make one meeting?
Let's just see how things develop.
Okay, so
Make that call in March.
March after we sort of get a firmer handle on it. I'm okay with that. You guys okay with that? We'll sort of table it until March. We'll make a firm decision in the March board meeting, though. Okay.
We'll have a better handle.
Yep.
The Morrison's committee?
Well, the Morrison Committee has met 4 times since the first of the year. And just a brief, if you will, kind of interim report. We've been studying the expenses and the contract wording, and have looked at the survey that was put out by Morrison's, and have come up with a few areas here that I think would be interesting. The survey that Morrison's put out, when you look at it, with the answers that they asked, were 3 of the answers were all in the good or better spectrum, and 2 of the answers were in the negative spectrum, which meant there was no neutral spectrum, or average, or the middle of the road. So we are working on a new survey that we anticipate we will have out by the 1st of March or thereabouts, so that we can come up with a more conclusive decision on what the residents and owners would like to see as far as dining goes. Just a little bit of update on in the contract, Morrison anticipated, and I think that's probably the best word, because there's a clause in there that says anything in the contract is not a guarantee. So, but at any rate, they anticipated that they would have meal costs that are running between $14.20 a meal and $15.83 a meal. That's an 11.5% cushion built in. The current meal cost for the month of January, and of course that was the current meal cost. Labor alone in January was $17.57. Food was $7.95. So they're way over their $15. At any rate, some will say, well, food costs have gone up. Yep, but they haven't gone up those kind of percentages. And that's, kind of where things are. We'll be getting the survey out and letting everyone have a voice on where we should go with the Morrisons and about the quality of their food. That's just kind of a brief update right now. Thank you.
All right. Obviously, nothing on nominating yet. I did want to make a comment. I've had a lot of people ask me about the status of the resident manual. Julie Mazel's been working very hard on that. We've had a few meetings, and it's getting pretty well almost finished to the end. So that'll be great to have that available again for all the current residents and the new residents coming in as well.
Is Julie here? What's your sense on the timing of it being completed, out of curiosity?
Week or two.
Okay.
I'm sorry, what was the answer? I didn't hear.
Week or two.
Okay, thank you.
You guys have anything before we get into questions?
Yeah, I do want to have a quick discussion about, we briefly talked about it the other day as a board, but the format for, questions, right? Last year, we started the year off incredibly open. And you can make comments about the sort of the process of interaction. But last year, we started off very open. Yeah, there was like almost no rein on it at all, right? And towards the end of the year, at first I thought it was really important to do that. It was important to do that because we were going through a lot of things, right? We were going through, Chris leaving. There was a lot of emotion about what was going on. And so I thought it was a good opportunity for us to sort of make sure people were being heard and heard the way they wanted to be heard. So we let that to be open. But as we got towards the end of the year, the whole conversation started to devolve. And it devolved into this place where a lot of the conversation stopped being with the board. While we would have board, there was conversation going on back and forth, and it was sort of out of control outside of the board. So it sort of started to fail to be a board meeting, it felt like, at the end. So what I wanted to do was sort of talk about maybe the process. We then went to a question, written question only, and we talked about other options. So I just wanted to make sure we talk about what we want to do going forward, and I want to talk about it openly. I don't want to talk about it in an executive session, about what we want to happen. So
when we started in 2018 with the new board, when we started allowing, resident owners could always come, but they could never speak. So in December of 17, the board talked about it and decided they would wait until January of 18 for the new board members to kind of talk about it and decide on their own. It was decided that they would let the residents and owners speak at the board meeting. It had to be pertaining to something on the agenda, and they were given 2 minutes to talk. And if they had a question that wasn't on the agenda, it could be submitted to be answered at the next board meeting. So that's what was voted then. It's kind of up to the board now how you want to proceed.
How did that work? Was it adequate? I mean, did you feel like it?
Worked fine. Worked fine.
So the only thing about that I guess I would ask if we were to talk about reinstituting something like that, is that I just think that it's important for, what I remember about it, being somebody who attended the board meetings, was you didn't get material, you didn't know what was on the agenda, so the only thing that you couldn't prepare for anything except a reaction to whatever was being discussed at the table. And then it felt limited. So I feel like if we were to institute something like that, then what we should do is make sure that we have an agenda that's out in advance so that people can at least know what we're going to talk about, and if they have interests in those areas and comments in those areas, they're prepared to be able to ask those. It makes for, to me, a more productive Q&A. And they might not want to attend. They might want to attend because of what the subject matter is. But it just seems that.
I think the idea of an agenda in advance is a great idea. I mean, that's wonderful. But I don't think if you look at today's agenda, you would have anything on there that was significantly of interest that would trigger any kind of questions, except maybe the Morrison's thing. But I think there should be an opportunity to bring forth new business at some point in time. And the board should be able to say, okay, we'll take that under advisement without giving an answer if it's something that's not obvious, you know. Example might be that Rita said this morning that the dining room now is open for meals, walk in without reservations, right? And so, you know, that kind of question, if it wasn't announced, that question could be asked, and when are you going to open the dining room? Rita can say, oh, by the way, we're going to open it today. Or it's on the plans for the next 2 weeks or some time in the future. I think there's a lot of questions that could be answered without prior knowledge of the question. And if you can't answer, we just have to say, I'm sorry. We'll have to look into that.
Any other comments?
Yeah, I do have one. I agree with that. And I think that by putting out the agenda in the Towers Talk immediately before the board meeting, and if we could give them a little more detail of what possibly we're going to be talking about, so that means that the board might need to prepare a little bit better and then send it out, and so they will know what we're going to be talking about. And I agree. I think that if someone has a question, they should be able to ask, as long as it's within the scope of the board. And if we can't answer, then we do research and get back with them.
Does that read anything from you?
No.
No, you're good with that? No.
Good.
Does somebody want to try to put together a motion here on how we want to do that?
I motion that we prepare the agenda prior to our board meeting with pertinent information that's going to be discussed at the meeting, with extra that may not be noted on our normal agenda.
And then we'll have an open session for comments and
Yes.
questions. That'll be limited in time to reasonable. I mean, I don't want to get into a debate over things, right? So that's what I want to avoid.
Yeah, with limited time, I do agree with
Right.
the limited time.
So we'll give it a couple of minutes within reason, and then go ahead and any questions that are asked for the other business, answer what we can, and defer what we can't till the next board meeting, but ensure that we address them in the next board meeting.
Absolutely.
Everybody good with that?
Good.
You're going to be able to get Linda, you're going to be able to get a resolution out of that?
I'll work it.
Okay.
Okay.
All right. So anybody got a second?
Second.
Votes? Okay, great, super.
Sir,
Yes,
can I make a
Is it
comment?
time for a
In the
second?
past, in some meetings, I'm not sure.
hang on a second. We're about to get to questions in a second.
It's not a question, it's a suggestion.
Okay,
I'm an owner here, and I'd like to make a suggestion, please. Thank you for
Oh.
a short suggestion.
okay.
Please have a microphone out here so that
Oh,
if we are
yes.
allowed to participate and have a meaningful suggestion, then we could, everyone could hear, you might hear better, and it would be a more inclusive type meeting. And y'all can kick that around when you have your private meetings, but I would suggest that. Thank you, appreciate it.
Okay,
We can do that.
all right, yeah. Right, so we'll make sure that we have a microphone out there, I think. Today we're short-staffed, which is why we don't have a microphone.
I didn't think about it, honestly.
Okay,
I can handle better.
what else? What else is, we'll send you out there. What else is on the agenda? Is there any other business for the board? Nope, no other business for the board? Okay, do you want to get to some of the questions that are written?
Yes.
And then we'll open it up, and then we'll ask for any other business, just as we just sort of resolve.
Okay. The first one, what can be done regarding the dumpsters the contractors have placed on the upper deck? It is an eyesore to not only the residents who face that side, but visitors mention it as well. My comments with conversations with Rick is, your contractor's manual states the dumpsters should be against the rear wall, but even with that, it's still an eyesore. We tried to place the dumpsters at the rear wall, and then it led to other people, visitors, and other contractors illegally dumping into various containers, and then that contractor's trying to trace back who dumped to charge. Rick feels very strongly that we shouldn't have dumpsters up there at all because of the weight. You've got the size of the vehicle that is dropping and picking up for the dumpsters, and then when the dumpster's full, you've got that weight. And he's always been concerned about weight on the upper deck as well. A suggestion was to try to build some type of panel fence around the dumpster that had a gate to where it could be opened and moved in and out, so it's not so much an eyesore. It would probably have to be freestanding, but it's definitely an issue. But as long as we are having condos renovated, there's not really anywhere else to put a dumpster for the contractors. So that's our comments. Unless you guys have other suggestions, or we've also looked at trailers, but that would be just as much as an eyesore because you would have it all out in the open.
Yeah, there's just not a good location. We don't have enough land to have a dumpster location specified, yeah. I guess maybe we go buy a couple houses over here if they come for sale. But we just don't have, and anybody has an idea of where we could place them, that'd be great to know, because none of us like them sitting anywhere where they are.
Scott, it's not only where they're placed, but the green dumpster that's on the far wall has been full as it is today for weeks. And that's unacceptable. If we're going to allow contractors to bring it in, they ought to get them the heck out when they get full.
Thank you, Dan. That's a good point, that they need to be moved properly. Yes.
I'll hand that over to Rick. The second question, I'm a registered architect and believe it is my professional responsibility to advise of dangerous conditions. The sidewalk outside the 2 doors east of the main entrance has a slope that is a V. He's talking about the area where the non-auto doors is at the connector. Of course, we've looked at that. The only option would be to regrade and pave the front circle. I think you've looked at it.
I've looked at that, and with it kind of got put on hold with the advent of the chases potentially taking up all the money. And so we kind of got that on hold right now, and yes, that needs to be corrected. We also have to consider the fact that when you come out of the building, we need to have a exit side of the door needs to be the same level as the interior side of the door, so there's not a step at the doors. You can do that in residential, you can have a step, but in commercial, you cannot have a step. And so we're looking at what you can do there, which means we have to raise the driveway. You raise the driveway, you lower the clearance between the driveway and the overhead. So we gotta balance all that out and see where we go. But right now, it's just on hold, it's not forgotten. Thank you.
What is this year's marketing budget and what was it for last year? 2021 was 18,000, 2022 is 36,000. What is the marketing goal?
Well, I think one of the things that we need to do is make sure that we understand what our image is and that it's properly presented to the community. There was a lot that came up last year in last year's meetings that were about, who are we, who aren't we, who do we want here, who don't we want here, all those conversations came up. And I think that the biggest thing that we're going to face, the biggest thing that we should do is make sure that we identify ourselves and that our material reflects who we are. And that's what we hope to accomplish with that.
Are there any plans to upgrade the basement hall? I would say that's on the back burner, as we didn't mention it in the capital planning, but it definitely takes less priority over the Chase situation.
Well, here's the one thing. We laid out a capital plan, right? And that was the bare bones estimate of what we thought it was going to be. And it probably was on the conservative side, right? Some of the things that we're seeing maybe coming in a little bit less. There's going to be a question of tolerance now, right? Because, okay, well, we put out, I think, $1.5 million or something like that. That's what we thought it was going to cost. Bill and I looked at ways to finance that last year if we had to, without trying not to do any special assessments. We think that those things are still on the table, right? That we might be able to get away with not doing any special assessments on such a big project. And so what we could do is we need to know what we have to do, what it will take our resources to do, understand the timing of things that have to be done, the disruption of everything that's going to go on, and determine whether or not there's any room for anything else. Doesn't mean that the capital plan as we described it last year is exactly what it needs to be. We're going to go through that in March, and we'll have another conversation about it. But we may be moving things around.
It's all money.
What can be done to get rid of the dirty
Hang on a
towel?
sec.
Oh.
Well, hey, Carol, is it related to that?
Yeah, it was my question.
Oh, was your question?
That was my question, and the end of the question was, is there any way to
Right.
get rid of the dirty
That was my next
rag
thing I
that
was about to
sits
read.
there?
That was the next thing I was about to read. I separated it because it's really two different
Okay,
things.
sorry.
What can be done to get rid of the dirty towel that is used to keep the water from coming in the B elevator? The reason why that water is coming in is because just like in the front connector that we had to replace all the caulking, is anywhere we have all the glass panels, the caulking is completely worn out. So we do have water intrusion coming in. So the fix for that is just like we discussed last week in the capital meeting, that all the caulking needs to come out and be replaced.
In the proposals, the proposals are about sealing and caulking
Yep,
the
re-caulking.
entire thing. That's included in
Yep,
that,
all
right?
glass areas, windows, sliding doors.
Mhm. Right, everywhere that there could be water intrusion, except for birds.
I have asked maintenance to make sure that towels are replaced regularly, but unfortunately, until we remove all the caulking and replace it, there's nothing else we can do about it.
So coming.
Can you give us an update on the road work that will be done in front of MVT, and what is the word on the possibility of a roundabout? It's kind of, I touched a little bit on that earlier. I know last week there was a couple meetings across the street at the new Veterans Park site. Hadn't really heard anything about any movement, and just noticed yesterday when I came in, the ribbons around the trees, and I reached out, like I said, to the eminent domain attorney and a bunch of people at Sandy Springs, so, we should hear something back in a couple days, and Reed's gonna inquire on it as well. Are there any plans to upgrade the 6th floor? I think that kind of, we know we still have the 6th floor and the 3rd floor to renovate, so I think that kind of goes back to the same thing with the basement hall. I would think the 6th floor and the 3rd floor would have priority over the basement hall if we had the money to do that, but.
It's on the list, right?
It's
It's not off the list.
It's not off the list. It's definitely a major concern, and we want to get that done as quick as we can get the plans together for what we're going to do with the chases and where that money's coming from, so.
What is or can be done to protect residents from getting COVID from another resident that has it? If a resident's positive for COVID, they should follow the guidelines and stay quarantined for at least 5 days or longer if symptoms still persist. That's what we tell everybody. If residents had direct contact with a positive person, then the resident should do the right thing and stay quarantined. The other part of that question is what can be done if a resident is positive or exposed and doesn't want to follow the rules and stay quarantined. I had a call saying this resident tested positive and they won't stay quarantined. Well, we can't stop them from coming out of their condo, but HOA attorney says we can prohibit them from going into the common areas because that would be considered a nuisance for other residents. I would hope that we wouldn't have that problem here, but evidently we have had an instance, so. A resident who parks the car in the parking lot asked about the lack of cleaning in the entire parking garage and the elevator. We're now fully staffed in housekeeping, so I followed up with our housekeeping supervisor to make sure there's 4 different carts and each cart does different duties. And I've asked her to make sure that the parking lot is back on the cart. The elevator area, they do clean it and they do complain several times a day that they'll clean it, contractors will come in and not clean up after themselves, and they'll have to go back over there. So somehow we've got to figure out how to better police the contractors not cleaning up after themselves and charging them per the contractor's manual.
Find out who they are.
When will the podiatrist appointments with cutting of toenails continue? And is there a possibility of getting toenails cut here at NBT with or without having a podiatrist in charge anytime soon? The podiatrist comes every quarter. They did not come the last quarter because of COVID. They'll be coming the end of March, but soon the salon will offer appointments for pedicures and manicures. They're waiting on the pedicure chair to come in and the manicure table or nail tech table, whatever you want to call it. It's been ordered, it's just taking a little bit longer to get here.
Is there any way to, increase the frequency of some of the home health services?
Probably the dentistry. We've tried to increase the podiatrist in the past, and unless we go to a different service, a different company, probably not with this particular group.
So,
They book a year in advance.
How do we pick this particular partner?
Honestly, they've just been coming here for a long time.
So maybe just at some point, I mean, one of the things that, I read to the board last month was sort of the objectives of what we needed to strengthen. One of those things in there was the home health services, because we don't have the luxury of having PCC people go to the rooms, right? And there seemed to be, well, we're not turning this place into a assisted living. It's got to be rich in amenities, and those things are amenities. So what I want to make sure is that we know who's out there for competition for home health services that we could contract with that may provide more frequency, so and better services. I don't know that the services are bad. I just know that They didn't come because of COVID. Now it's been 6 months since somebody's been able to come clip the toenails. So, you know, it would be nice to know what our options are instead of it, you know, instead of it just being the way it's been.
Okay. Okay, I still don't understand how the board can just add such a high fee without owner's input. For example, in the bylaw, special assessments for capital improvements is limited to no more than $200 a unit. So my question is, what justification does the board have for assessing such a high punitive fee for a select group of owners? A one-time fee of $200 would be more reasonable, but a yearly fee of $250 is unreasonably high. Once again, I ask, why did the 2022 board decide to arbitrarily without notice, levy such a large fee? What is the jurisdiction for deciding a yearly fee should be anything, much less an exorbitant $250? What expenses are the board charging to investors, and how does this differ from charges to other owners? Well, first I want to say the charge is not just to investors, it's the yearly lease fee is to all owners, no matter who you are and who you lease to. The process was kind of based off of the amount of leases that we had that were outdated last year. At one time, we had 85 leases that were outdated. So just trying to get processes in place, I've got to send owners letters saying, you know, we do not currently have a lease on file. There's an insurance issue there. If your tenant causes a water leak or fire or anything and they don't have a current lease, then they're not obligated to pay anything for the damage in the unit that they're leasing or any other units. After we send a letter to the owners, then we have to call to follow up on it. Once we get the lease, then we've got to enter all the new information from the lease, scan it, and now we have a process to make sure that there's insurance attached to it. So it is a process. It's not just like we reach out to someone and they just go ahead and say, oh, here it is.
And last year you were, at one time you were chasing 80 or so leases.
Yep.
And what that is if the landlord could help us out, right? So by making sure that everything was done on time, but, and then when you do that, then what happens is all the other homeowners pay, right? It's time taken from you, the staff, and there are 200 other homeowners that don't do anything, right? So you know, it's basically assessing fees to where those administrative costs are targeted, and it's well within the board's authority to do so. And it seemed reasonable. And we talked about it as a board, and we voted on it as a board, and we assessed it as a board in the annual meeting.
You want follow-up questions now about that issue?
Yeah, that's fine, yeah.
First of all, Rita, you said that all owners pay it. That's not true. It's the 120 or so condos that are owned by non-resident.
Right, it's all owners who lease their unit out. Not all owners that lease their unit are investors, but it's all owners who lease the unit out is what I'm saying.
It's a leasing fee. It's not a owner's fee, it's not a investor fee, it's a leasing fee.
Well, that's what you chose to call it to avoid having to pay it yourself, but...
Well, you know what, that's just crap, okay?
No, it's not crap.
Yeah,
Who else
it
besides
is.
you isn't eligible for that owns a condo that doesn't live here? Who else?
There's 32 units that are owned by family members that
Okay.
let their mom or dad live there, and there's no lease.
So none of those 32 are going to be paying the $250,
Right.
all right? Are any of those 32 also problems for you, and were in those 80-something people you had to chase?
No, they don't have a lease. They don't charge the person to live there. It's mom or dad, and they just live there.
All right, so as long as I don't have a lease, then I don't have to pay it either.
Well, it has to be family owned. You can't just not have a lease per the bylaws.
It seems like you're penalizing, well, if you take those 30 from the 120, that says there were 90 people that did not conform with whatever the rules are. And since I'm 2 of those units, I know I'm conforming. It seems like I, and apparently other people, whoever asked that question, feel that they're conforming with the rules, but are still being asked to pay something that those that don't conform don't do.
Right,
So if somebody, Rita, isn't conforming with what they're expected to do, hit them with $500 or $1,000 or something, get their attention. But those of us that are following the rules, just to assign an additional $250 a year for no additional service, many of us don't get it. I'm not the only one. I may be speaking now, but I know there are a lot of people very upset by this. And also, we would like to know specifically where in the bylaws or wherever is it written that the board has the authority to assess that kind of fee, because what's coming next? A turnstile at the dining room that we have to put in 50 cents before we can go in? At what point do these fees stop? You're penalizing investors, call them whatever you want, but you're penalizing a certain group of people that may be doing nothing wrong.
And yeah, there's actually 104 units that are leased out, not counting the 32 that are family owned that don't have a lease. But yes, some of the owners are great about, they do their own leases, they get their leases done, they hand in all their information, but there's very few.
Rita, if the owner, who is also an investor or whatever you want to call them, I think that's on, if they choose to do their own lease, if they choose to ask the tenant to give them a copy of their insurance and take care of all of the paperwork, why can't they do that? It would be the same as any freestanding home that would be responsible for their own finances.
They can do that. We've been
Okay.
given the option all along, but the problem is they don't follow up with it.
But
So
that's their problem, that's not yours.
That's correct.
That's the owner's problem if the insurance that the tenants provide is not
But per the
current.
bylaws, it states that we are to have a copy of a lease
Yeah.
signed on file.
Okay, I have no problem with that, because I give that to you every year. But what I'm saying is, the responsibility for having the tenant's insurance is not Mount Vernon Tower's responsibility, it's the owner's,
Correct.
not yours. I'm a Republican.
Let me talk to the board here a minute. Why don't we revisit this and look at the idea of having a 30-day grace period from the time the lease expires until the lease and all the data is due. And that, during that 30-day period, the fee would be $50. And after the 30-day period where we had to go chase it down, it jumps to $250. Just an idea.
And Scott, I'd like to add, put out a list of what's required. If you're gonna charge me $250, I damn well better know what I'm supposed to do.
Yeah, I think that'd be appropriate, to definitely, under either circumstance, we need a list to tell the owner what's required and what the checklist is. So,
Okay, the other part of that is in the declaration, Article 5, Section 2, Paragraph 1, gives the board the right to vote for such a fee as that.
Say that again, the number, please.
Article 5, Section 2, Paragraph 1.
So it's just within the authority to do it, but not to, sort of poo-poo that discussion. The fee is a reaction to what happened last year, okay? It was extraordinarily painful last year to have more than about 80% of the leases not followed through. And we have a bylaw, and that bylaw requires us to keep those records. And so if the owner doesn't provide those records, then we wind up chasing. And so that's the reaction to that. Now, I have no problem, it's actually a board decision, changing the rules around the leasing right, and the leasing requirement. I think it's a good idea to have. I also believe it's a good idea to have, you know, sort of a document that says, here's your checklist. I also agree with Dan to a degree that says, you know what, if you're late, then you're going to pay the late penalty for it, because we have to chase it. And maybe it should be more if that happens. And maybe it will do exactly what you believe it would do, which is make sure that the people who have the responsibility to keep those records, and then provide them in a timely manner to us so that we don't have to, our staff doesn't have to chase it, because that comes at the expense of the rest of the homeowners.
I can't speak for the board, but I think that the board would be open to making those changes.
I think we should discuss it.
I agree.
You want me to put a motion on the table?
I think that we need to sit down, look at what it takes, and make sure that the analysis of the cost is right, and decide what the process is.
Let's do a cost, look at the cost and the more details, yeah. Come up with another plan, or keep the same. Right.
But I would agree, we would be open to it.
Right. Sylvia?
Why isn't that already included in the owner's manual? You've spent a lot of time redoing the manual. That should be included. You shouldn't have to every year remind people what the lease requires.
It wouldn't be in the residence manual necessarily, but it is in the bylaws, and the owners actually should be reading that. When you're a new owner, I think you should be reading it. If you can be an owner and not live here, so you might not necessarily even look at the resident manual.
You're saying the bylaws discuss what a investor is to provide the front desk?
Well, not necessarily. It states about the lease is required to be on file.
But beyond that, does it say anything other than lease?
No, we're required to have settlement statement or a lease on
So
file.
let's get the whole laundry list.
Right, but it wouldn't. I wouldn't put it in the resident manual, but I would put it in a checklist when somebody new buys a condo. Here you go. This is, yeah.
While we're on the subject of leases, why don't we include automobiles?
What do you mean?
Why shouldn't the owner of the automobile be responsible for his insurance and advising the board of that?
We do. We have a copy. In order to get a parking spot in the covered garage, you have to provide a valid driver's license and a copy of your current insurance.
But that is not in the bylaws. There's nothing in the bylaws around.
No, but we
auto insurance.
automatically do that.
Good policy for what?
Thank you, Dave.
Next question. Is the board contacting the owners that haven't responded to the question regarding changing the smoking rules at MVT? So that's a declaration consent. So
Yeah, Julie, you asked me that question, and I have not responded to you on it yet. The smoking policy was a owner-led or community-led, sort of motion, I guess, if you will. And the board agreed that we would take that up and talk about it and create a consent form for that. And I'm torn between whether or not the board, it should be the board who decides or promotes one answer or the other. I frankly find myself reluctant to do that if it's if it's put on me to do that, because I don't think it's my responsibility to sort of promote that personal, habitual, whatever it is, view, social or view on folks. So I have stayed away from it, I will admit.
So the group, so you're saying the group that got the petition signed to bring it forth, that they could get the documentation to pursue
Yeah,
it.
I mean, I certainly would help and not resist anyone doing that, right? And make sure that the information was available to them so that they could go ahead and sort of promote that if they wish. But I'd rather leave it up to the community to promote that.
I'll make a comment, please.
Yes.
As a non-smoker, 45 years clean, and I still have lung problems. Secondhand smoke is really a detriment to all of us in this room. And I think it's a good idea to have non-smoking environment here. And if there's a area that people would like to smoke, have it outside in a certain area with smoking canisters to throw their butts. So I think that's good, especially for most of us in here are trying to live a healthy life for the time we're here. And so that's my thought about the smoking issue. It's not intruding on other people's right to smoke. If they want to do that, I feel sorry for them. Because I'm paying the price for a minor price because I smoked 45 years ago. And secondhand smoke is horrible for me. So that's just a thought to share with everyone. Thank you.
I appreciate that. Julie.
Right behind you.
It's my understanding, and my memory's not great, but in, I don't know if it's the last board meeting or the one before where the recording was sent out, I believe you stated that you were going to be contacting the rest of the residents that didn't respond about this and maybe one other thing, which is why I waited and then asked the question if you were going to be doing it.
Yeah, I think that my in the board meeting, and if I wasn't clear, I'll make sure that I clear it now. My intention had to do with the initiation fee, or the origination fee, as something that I would go out and make sure that, you know, people were reinformed about that. I don't believe I commented on the smoking or not. If I did, then I'd have to check that, but I didn't think so. I mean, my personal view on this is it has not changed, which is I didn't have an opinion of it to begin with. I understand it, believe me, I understand it. But from the beginning, we and the board agreed that we would support the effort of the owners to do that. And we did that. We created a consent form that would cover outside smoking, would cover sort of grandfathering people who smoked. We put that forward. But obviously, like any of it, there wasn't enough people even at the meeting that could pass that. So nothing got passed. What happens with the consent is that we offer it's really an opinion about whether or not you would prefer something like this to be in place. It was smoking and it was the initiation fee. Neither one of them had enough consents to pass, but it doesn't mean that it stops there, right? Some people weren't at the meeting. Some people, it wasn't a vote. It's not a yes or no vote. It's not up and down. It's simply a trying to understand what the community wants, taking time to do that, and then if you find that you're at a failure point with that, then what you might do is reconsider it. And I think that the attorney, Randy, who spoke about that, was really clear about how that works. So we'll continue to take another, I was planning on taking another swipe at the initiation fees, which I'll do. And after that, I'll come back and say, okay, do I have no's? Do I have yeses? If they're no's, why are there no's? Is it the amount? Is it something else? And we'll play it from there. So
On the consent form, it has to have the owner's signature and the condo number. So I've got a list of everyone who did send a consent in, because once you send the consent in, you're basically saying you're for that change. So I've got a list for both of those.
But we have no idea who's a real no or not. We just know who's a yes.
Right. kind of the next question was about the owners not approving the transfer of ownership fee at the annual meeting in December. But you stated at the board meeting in January that you're going to start a campaign to obtain additional signatures from owners who did not vote for the fee. You stated that you know who they are. So I think we just covered the process. As it's not a vote, it's a consent form. It has to have the owner's name, condo number on there, so we kind of know who's sending a consent and who's not. So it could be.
Rita, that's my question. Can you please read it the way I wrote it? Because you've lost some of the interpretation.
The owners did not approve the 3 times HOA transfer of ownership fee at the annual meeting in December, but Greenberg stated at the January board meeting that he was going to start a campaign to obtain additional signatures from owners who did not vote for the fee. He stated, "We know who they are. Since owners were told their vote was secret, how can anyone know who they are? What is the point of voting, secret or not, if Greenberg is just going to contact those he knows who they are to obtain votes after the sham vote was taken? Since Greenberg apparently knows who they are, has his campaign already started? Who is involved in the campaign? Especially, what are these owners who had already voted no once being told in an effort to convince them to change their vote?"
Well, clearly, I am the only board member that meant anything to that initiation fee. Reed, you didn't want that, right?
I didn't want that.
Right.
didn't want
Scott,
that.
Scott, you didn't want that, right?
Why would we have that?
Yeah. Bill, you didn't want that, right? Rita, you were there.
Lorraine wanted it, as I remember.
Yeah. So it isn't about Greenberg. It's about the board who wanted that for a number of reasons, which we explained. And we think it's important. I'm not going to debate it again right now. I'll do exactly what I said I was going to do, Dan, which is go ahead and notify those people who did not sign a consent form, didn't vote, just didn't sign a consent form, and see if they're interested in signing a consent form based on what we say is the reason and the reasons that we wanted to have that we thought it was important for the community. So we're going to do that. And like I said a minute ago, once we go through that round, then we'll know. A lot of people didn't show up. They didn't hear it. Whatever reason. And what we'll do is we'll give everybody a second shot at it. And if they still are not interested, we can't get that passed, I'll just simply ask the question, which is, are you saying yes or are you saying no? If you're saying no, why is it? Is the number too steep? Is 3 times the wrong number? What if it was 2 times the number? What if it was 1 time the number? Most communities have an initiation fee. We shouldn't consider ourselves to be different. And they do it for good reasons, to ensure that their capital reserves are sound. That's the reason. That's my answer.
Okay.
Do you want to add something? You want to add something, Rick?
There was another reason for the board taking this position at the time, and that was the fact that there are people who've been here for 3 and 5 and 10 years who've been paying into the homeowners association. And there are people who are coming in now when it is really a good opportunity to buy property here when the market is going up and be able to operate a rental business with very little overhead. The homeowners association takes care of all the costs for most of the owners here, and the only cost for people who own a unit is to pay the taxes on them and maintain the interior of the unit. And there was a reason thinking that it was fair to ask these people to put a little bit into the kitty to take care of those who have been putting in for a number of years. That was the concept that I took in looking at it. And as a potential investor myself, I would not mind participating in that concept. That was my feeling.
But the prior owners, but the prior owners had already paid into the HOA fees. Therefore, you are not asking the new person to pay more because the prior owners had already paid into whatever fees. Therefore, that fee is probably not a good idea.
Next question.
Okay. Owners who oppose this transfer of ownership fee would also like to know who they are, so the facts can be provided to these owners. Specifically, we want names of all the owners and the condos they own, their contact information, including their phone number and email addresses, and if they voted for the transfer of ownership fee in December or since, who will provide this information and when. I'm going to say I'm not going to give any owner's name, number, email, or condo number to anyone unless they ask me to give it to someone.
Actually, there, I gave you something earlier, which is, maybe we should make we should actually have a motion on this. It is the rules, what is the Georgia Nonprofit Code with respect to associations and the use of mailing lists. And so, Rita, can you read that?
Mm-hmm.
For everybody's benefit,
Without
who wants to
consent of the
know?
board, a membership list or any part thereof may not be obtained or used by any person for any purpose unrelated to a member's interest as a member, without limiting the general of the foregoing. Without the consent of the board, a membership list or any part thereof may not be used to solicit money or property unless such money or property will be used solely to solicit the votes of the members in an election to be held by the corporation, used for any commercial purpose, or sold to or purchased by any person.
That does not restrict what the question asked for.
It does not. However, the first motion, I want to make a motion here. That motion is because there are a lot of lists that are out there. They've been used, and those lists are not necessarily accurate, okay? They contain people who are no longer here, not associated with Mount Vernon Towers. And so my motion is that no list that exists is currently authorized by the board. Anybody want to second that motion?
I'll second.
Any discussion on that?
Yes.
No. This is for the board.
Expand that a little bit for me.
Well, there are lots of, I guess, hijacked lists that are out there. And people use them and they communicate with people. Could be, may not be about business of the membership of the board. What I want to do here is just say there is a process by which a member can get that information. It's clear in the Georgia Code. So what I want to do is make sure that people go through the right process if they want a list, okay? And so I want to call all current lists that are out there not supported by the board unless someone comes through the board to request the list for the purpose that is within the laws of the state of Georgia for nonprofit organizations, and we will look at that and make sure that we do that.
Isn't that self-evident though? I mean, if the board hadn't provided the list, somebody else is flying it out. I don't know why offhand, I don't know why we need to do the motion.
Because, you know why, Scott? Because I was accused, all right, I don't want to make it personal, but I was accused of having provided a list without authorization. So, and that doesn't happen, right? So I just want to make sure everybody's clear. Go ahead, Doris, yeah.
May I ask you to define what is on the list? My name, my condo number, I would assume. What else?
Well, if you're talking about my list, it's got,
Oh, no. What is on, I think she's just talking about,
I
if we're going to.
want you to tell me whether I could have to get rid of my Christmas card list.
No, you can have as many Christmas card lists as you
All
want.
right, but most of them are
The point,
people that live
and
here.
that's okay, the point being that
I
it's
want to know what you do not want on a list.
Oh, I can publish sensitive personal information document, which is just sensitive personal information, which you couldn't have, right? You might not have any of that information. A bank account number, I wouldn't want that, okay? And I'm not particularly saying I care whether or not you use a list that you want. I just want to make sure that everybody's clear that it's not a board list. It's not a board provided list, it's not a board authorized list. Okay, so how it gets done is not the board's business here. And so I don't believe that that's common knowledge. I believe that people have lots of lists, and I believe that that there are many people that believe that the board has provided that information to people, which it has not. So I'm prepared to say we don't have.
So your motion's been seconded?
Yes.
Yeah.
Do you want to vote?
Did you get enough information, Scott?
Yeah, and I think it's an unnecessary motion, period.
I'm going to vote on it. No, we have no authorized list. Anybody who wants a list, send your request.
but I still think
Deal.
that
Hang on a
if
second.
it's got, if you live here, there's a floor by floor that's got your name, condo number, your phone number on there, does not have emails. But if you do not live here, and, you know, I have a list with everybody's name, their home address, and their personal phone numbers and their emails, I still don't think that somebody could request that information without that person giving consent to give their information out.
Well, this is actually the whole gist of what Jill Odom was looking to make sure that we did, right? This is the background for that. And I think it's a good thing to do, and I think we should look at preferences. What people usually do is that they're allowed to opt out of a list, okay? Not necessarily opt in, they're allowed to opt out. And everybody should have an opportunity to opt out of a list. But what we should be doing is defining if we're going to provide lists for a purpose which is allowed as a paper, as information from Mount Vernon Towers, then we should be able to provide that information for a proper purpose and with non-sensitive information. And if an owner does not consent to it, they shouldn't have it sent. Seems
Now,
simple.
proper purpose is hard to define, and also control of the list once it leaves the facility is very difficult to know what a person does with it. So I think that an alternative to this might be that if we took and if somebody needed the list for whatever reason, as long as with the proper reason, I mean, that we'd have to know that. If they would bring in their communication, whatever it is, and then pay a processing fee to Mount Vernon Towers, we could use our list and send it to those people that were there. That would save the security of the list and would also allow that person who wanted to communicate with this group of people to communicate.
Okay, I wasn't defining what the list would be. I just wanted to suggest that no lists right now are board approved.
Can we finish the vote?
What's that?
The vote is for, I don't know.
The vote is for,
No, I know what it is. But we need to finish the vote.
yeah, well, we were in discussion, so we.
But you were in the middle of it. We don't know who's opposed. I got 4 yays and.
Well, Scott has not
That's
voted.
I just
what
said
I'm
nay,
asking.
yeah, no.
Okay, all right. So that's
Thank
the
you.
vote.
I don't think it's surprise.
All right, so I guess we can move to the next question.
Rita, still on this one? So if I remember correctly from the previous recording of a board meeting that 102 condos, I believe, signed in favor of this 3 times HOA. Is that the right number?
Sounds right, I don't have it in front of me. I know, I think.
Sounds good,
Yeah.
that sounds good.
So as of this moment, 102 condos have approved this measure, which means 197 have not. And the only person at this stage that's going to be able to contact those 197 is the chairman. Those of us that oppose it, and at this moment we have to assume that's 197 condos, don't have an opportunity to talk to the rest of the people, including the 102 that did sign off on it, that may be signed with inappropriate information that we get accused of. So why are we going to take such a significant measure and just restrict it to one side of the debate?
All I'm saying is I'm not giving somebody's name,
I know what you're
home
saying, it's a
address,
question
email,
for the
and phone
board.
number.
We had the debate at the annual meeting, okay?
But
So-
you're not ending it there. You're going out now and knocking on,
That was
and
the whole-
only you are going out. Those of us that oppose it don't know which doors to knock on.
We're gonna
So we
try-
can knock on all of them, I guess, and upset all 299 residents who may not even be the owner of the condo of the door we're knocking on. We're going to cause massive turmoil in here if we don't do it some other way than what's currently anticipated. And those of us that oppose this measure strenuously object to what you're about to do.
Since I'm the one that put out the one-page memo prior to the annual meeting about this issue, I'd like to give a little bit of additional information. I've talked to, since some of you know, I work with Community Management Associates, which is the largest property management firm in Georgia. They have over 1,000 properties. I've asked the management there about this buy-in issue. They do not recommend it to any of their properties for the exact same reasons that I put in the document that I sent out. And that is that it is very likely that the owners will end up paying that fee because the buyer has to know about that fee, and they will drop their price accordingly.
Correct.
So here you have a large company, 1,000 properties that would not do it. Randy Lipschitz said there are a lot of properties, he's our attorney, said there are a lot of properties that do this. I have not heard yet what our reason for doing it would be. It usually is, from my experience, and again, I've got 20 years of condo board experience, so I've been through this before. My experience has been it's either to try to keep people that can't afford to come in, or to put money in reserves. So either way, it's still going to be, in most cases, the seller that's going to be paying that fee, and it does not make any sense to a lot of people.
Correct.
Next question.
Also, owners who oppose this transfer of ownership fee want to challenge Greenberg to a debate about it. This debate would be recorded and broadcast to all owners, like Greenberg's campaign speech he recorded and broadcast about the 7.5% HOA increase and his candidacy for the board. Does Greenberg accept this challenge?
I'm not even going to address the challenge. Go to the next question.
So your answer is no?
Not even going to, Dan, I'm not even going to address it. 5 members of the board voted unanimously to provide, to present to the ownership a consent for an initiation fee.
And it failed
we-
102 to 197.
Let's move on to the next question.
Dictatorship.
Is the board aware that many owners do not intend to pay the annual $250 lease fee and the transfer fee of ownership, and they will collectively defend their actions in court if necessary?
Yeah,
I think we
that's not a
counted-
question, right?
Post on that already.
Okay. Anything else? Any other business?
All the questions.
I'm sorry?
Oh, I did see one question come in right
Oh,
before the
oh.
meeting, was about the owner's login. If it was for only outside owners, it's for all owners. When you're putting that new password in, make sure you get the explanation point on it.
Password.
Any other business?
I move we adjourn.
Yeah, well.
We got one more question back here.
Yeah, I think we got two. I see someone in the back as
Oh,
well.
we got two or three back
Yeah.
here. Okay.
This is a very easy question. I'm just curious now that that there has been a change in the delivery. Is there a charge if we go to the desk or to the restaurant, the dining room, when we order a meal? Or is that still a $3 charge as if it were sent to the apartment or to
No,
the unit?
it's the $3 delivery fee is only if you're having it delivered to your condo. If
Okay.
you dine in or pick up to go, there's no charge.
So if you pick up to go, then I assume at the dining room, that's where you would go to pick it up?
Correct.
All right,
Now-
then that has no charge.
Right. If you dine in or you get it to go, you only pay the price of the meal for the meal period. You do not pay any additional delivery fees or other fees.
Okay, thank you very much.
Can't hear you.
Sandra Bullock, I'm currently a resident, not an owner. But I'd like to know if there's been any current consideration for improving the internet.
Yes.
I'm sorry, repeat it, please.
She wants to know if there's any current plans to improve the internet.
Yes. David is actually probably spending 50% of his day working on the internet. We keep up with the data, and looking at 5 years ago, we had probably about 285 users. Just last week, we had over 600, when I say users, devices connected. Just last week, we had over 600 devices connected. So he's continuing to add access points. And then on top of that, you add in residents who have their own providers, such as Comcast or AT&T. They also come in and hook to our server by appointment. So it's really, we're seeing a lot of streaming and more interest, so it's kind of bogging it down, but he is spending a lot of time working on that. He actually suggested to me to look at an outside professional service that would have knowledge of our type facility to see what else we could do other than the two services we already pay for, which is AT&T Fiber and an additional Comcast.
Okay.
Oh, and let me add, if you do see that it's extremely slow or doesn't seem to be working properly, notify the front desk, because sometimes the access points go bad. There was an area on the 10th floor that someone said, I can't get any service, and that access point went bad. But if we don't know about it, he can't check it.
If there are no more questions, I move we adjourn.
I second.
I'm in favor. Good. Meeting is concluded at 3:04.